The transport ship's engines hummed their final notes as it settled onto the landing pad. Through the small porthole, Kravik watched the alien world spread out before him like a green tapestry. Trees covered most of the visible landscape, broken only by a river that snaked through the valley below. This was Planet Verdant, home to the newest human colony that had caught the attention of the Galactic Council. Kravik gathered his equipment with practiced efficiency. His hunting gear was simple but effective, scanning devices, camouflage units, and observation tools that had served him well across dozens of worlds. As a Silthari, he stood nearly 8 feet tall with gray-blue skin and 4 arms that made handling multiple devices easy. His species had been tracking and studying dangerous life forms for over 3 centuries, and Kravik was considered one of their best. The mission briefing had been straightforward. Humans were spreading too quickly across the galaxy, settling on worlds without proper authorization, and adapting to environments that should have killed them. The Council wanted to know if they posed a real threat to the established order. Some species saw humans as nothing more than clever animals. Others whispered that they were something more dangerous. Kravik had studied the files during his journey. Humans were physically weak compared to most sentient species. They had thin skin, small teeth, and no natural weapons. Their technology was advanced but not remarkable. What puzzled the Council was their unpredictable behavior. They would fight impossible battles and win or surrender when victory seemed certain. They formed bonds with their own kind that seemed to defy logic, risking everything for individuals who contributed nothing to their survival. The landing ramp lowered with a soft hiss. Kravik stepped onto the surface of Verdant and immediately noticed the rich smell of plant life. The air was thick with oxygen, almost too much for his lungs. He activated his breathing filter and began walking toward the tree line. His first task was to establish observation points around the human settlement called New Haven. The walk through the forest revealed much about this world. The trees were massive, some reaching heights that dwarfed even the tallest buildings on his home planet. Strange bird-like creatures called to each other from the canopy above. Small mammals scurried through the underbrush, pausing to stare at him with curious eyes before disappearing into the shadows. What interested Kravik most was the evidence of human presence. They had not simply cleared the land and built their structures. Instead, they had woven their settlement into the existing ecosystem. Paths curved around large trees rather than through them. Buildings were raised on supports that allowed small animals to pass underneath. Gardens mixed human food plants with native species in patterns that seemed random, but actually supported local wildlife. He found his first observation point on a ridge overlooking the settlement. Through his scope, he could see humans going about their daily activities. Children played in open spaces while adults tended to various tasks. What struck him was how relaxed they appeared. Most species would post guards and build walls when settling a new world. These humans seemed to treat their environment as a friend, rather than an enemy. Kravik set up his first sensor array and began recording. The humans below showed no sign that they knew they were being watched. They moved with purpose but without fear. Some worked in groups while others performed solitary tasks. Children wandered freely, often alone, something that would be unthinkable among his own people. As the day progressed, Kravik moved to his second observation point on the opposite side of the settlement. This position gave him a view of the area where humans ventured into the deeper forest. He watched as small groups left the settlement on what appeared to be gathering expeditions. They carried tools but no weapons, another puzzling choice for a species supposedly intelligent enough to travel between stars. The most surprising discovery came near sunset. As darkness approached, Kravik expected the humans to retreat behind walls or barriers. Instead, many remained outside. Some sat in groups around small fires, sharing food and conversation. Others walked alone along paths that led into the forest. A few even appeared to be sleeping under the open sky. Kravik checked his sensors to confirm what he was seeing. The forest around New Haven was not empty of predators. His equipment detected several species of carnivores, some quite large. Yet the humans seemed oblivious to the danger. Either they were foolishly brave or they knew something about this world that his briefings had missed. He spent the night recording the settlement's activities. The humans did post a few watchmen, but they seemed more interested in tending fires than watching for threats. Many humans left their shelters during the night for various purposes, walking openly along lighted paths. Their behavior suggested a level of trust in their environment that defied basic survival instincts. By morning, Kravik had established 3 observation points and gathered initial data on human behavior patterns. His preliminary assessment was that these humans were either supremely confident in their abilities or completely ignorant of the dangers around them. Neither possibility aligned with what the Council believed about human intelligence and adaptability. He transmitted his first report back to the Galactic Council, noting the humans' unusual integration with their environment and their apparent lack of defensive measures. The response came quickly. Continue observation and gather more detailed behavioral data. The Council wanted to understand why humans succeeded in environments where other species failed. As the second day began, Kravik settled into his routine of systematic observation. He watched the humans begin their daily activities with the same relaxed attitude he had noted before. Children left their homes and wandered toward the forest edge, some in groups but others alone. Adults worked at various tasks, often stopping to interact with the local wildlife in ways that seemed casual and unplanned. The puzzle of human behavior was becoming more complex with each hour of observation. These were not the aggressive, dangerous beings that some council members feared, nor were they the simple, primitive creatures that others dismissed. They were something else entirely, something that did not fit into the categories his people used to classify intelligent life. Kravik prepared his equipment for another day of watching and recording. He had come to planet Verdant expecting to study a potential threat to galactic stability. Instead, he was beginning to suspect that he might be witnessing something far more significant than anyone had imagined. 3 days into his surveillance, Kravik noticed patterns in the local wildlife that his initial scans had missed. The forest around New Haven held more dangers than his equipment had first detected. Large predators moved through the deeper woods, creatures his database identified as razor-fanged prowlers and venomous crawlers. These beasts avoided the immediate area around the human settlement, but their tracks showed they hunted in the surrounding forest. From his position on the eastern ridge, Kravik watched a group of humans prepare for what appeared to be an educational expedition. Adults gathered with several children, carrying bags and simple tools. They moved toward a trail that led into the forest, the same trail where Kravik had detected predator sign the night before. One of the children caught his attention immediately. The boy appeared younger than the others, perhaps 6 or 7 years old by human standards. He had dark hair and moved with the boundless energy that Kravik had observed in young humans. Unlike the other children who stayed close to the adults, this boy wandered to the edges of the group, drawn to flowers and interesting rocks along the path. The group stopped at a clearing about half a mile from the settlement. The adults began some kind of lesson, pointing to various plants and animals. The children gathered around asking questions and examining specimens, but the young boy with dark hair had found something more interesting at the far edge of the clearing. He followed a colorful butterfly toward a cluster of flowering bushes. Kravik adjusted his scope to keep the child in view. The boy was moving away from his group, following the butterfly deeper into the forest. The adults were focused on their lesson and had not noticed his absence. This was exactly the kind of careless behavior that proved humans were not as intelligent as they claimed to be. The butterfly led the boy down a game trail that wound between massive trees. Kravik tracked his movement through the scope, expecting the child to realize his mistake and return to the group. Instead, the boy continued following the butterfly, fascinated by its bright colors and dancing flight pattern. By the time the adults noticed the missing child, he had traveled nearly a quarter mile into the forest. Kravik could hear their calls echoing through the trees, but the boy was too far away and too focused on his pursuit to respond. The search party that formed immediately showed the kind of frantic energy that Kravik associated with herd species, protecting their young. The boy finally stopped chasing the butterfly when it disappeared into the tree canopy. He looked around for the first time and seemed to realize that he was alone. The forest around him was quiet except for the distant sounds of the search party, but they were calling in the wrong direction. The child had wandered off the main trail and was now deep in an area that Kravik knew was frequently used by predators. Kravik faced an interesting decision. His mission was to observe human behavior, not to interfere with natural processes. If the child died because of human carelessness, that would provide valuable data about their survival capabilities. The Galactic Council would want to know how humans responded to the loss of young members, especially when that loss resulted from poor judgment. As afternoon moved toward evening, the boy tried to find his way back to the settlement, but human directional sense was notoriously poor, and the child was moving in circles. Worse, his calls for help were attracting attention from creatures that the humans probably did not know existed. Kravik detected the first predator response as the sun began to set. A razor-fanged prowler about the size of a large wolf but with considerably more intelligence and aggression had picked up the scent of the lost child. These creatures normally avoided areas with human activity, but a single, isolated target was different from a defended settlement. The boy had found a small stream and was following it, hoping it would lead back to familiar territory. But the stream curved away from the settlement, taking him further into dangerous country. As darkness fell, more predators began to move. Kravik's sensors detected at least 3 different species converging on the area where the child was lost. This was becoming a perfect test case for human survival abilities. The boy showed some basic intelligence, finding water and trying to create shelter under a fallen log. But he was clearly frightened and had no real survival skills. He called for help periodically, but his voice was getting weaker. The first predator to find him was a venomous crawler, a serpent-like creature that could kill with a single bite. Kravik watched through his scope as the creature approached the fallen log where the boy was hiding. The child had found a stick and held it like a weapon, but he had no chance against a predator that had evolved to hunt much larger and more dangerous prey than humans. Just as the crawler prepared to strike, something unexpected happened. A small dark shape exploded from the underbrush and launched itself at the serpent. Kravik adjusted his scope, trying to identify the new creature. It was about the size of a small dog, but built like a miniature bear. Its fur was black and gray, and it moved with incredible speed and aggression. The creature seized the crawler behind its head and shook it violently. The serpent was 3 times longer than its attacker, but the small animal's grip was unbreakable. Within seconds, the crawler was dead. The mysterious rescuer dropped the serpent and turned toward the boy, who was staring in amazement. Kravik consulted his database and identified the animal as a honey badger, a species native to this planet that his briefings had mentioned only briefly. The entry described them as small but fearless omnivores, known for their willingness to fight creatures many times their size. But what was a honey badger doing protecting a human child? The answer became clear as more predators approached. The honey badger positioned itself between the boy and each new threat, displaying a level of protective behavior that suggested more than coincidence. This animal was deliberately defending the human child, treating him as part of its pack or family group. 2 razor-fanged prowlers arrived simultaneously, stalking toward the fallen log from different directions. The honey badger could not defend against both, but it tried anyway. It charged the larger predator, latching onto its throat while the second prowler circled behind. The boy screamed and swung his stick at the second predator, more from instinct than any real hope of success. Kravik found himself leaning forward, watching the struggle with unexpected intensity. This was not the clinical observation he had planned. Something about the small animal's desperate courage and the child's helpless bravery made it impossible to remain detached. The honey badger was losing the fight against the first prowler when the second one prepared to attack the boy. But before it could strike, the sound of human voices echoed through the forest. The search party had finally found the right trail. The honey badger released its grip on the first prowler and spun to face the second predator just as it lunged toward the boy. Despite being half the size of either enemy, the small animal showed no hesitation. It intercepted the prowler in mid-leap, using its momentum to knock the larger creature off balance. Both animals tumbled across the forest floor in a tangle of claws and teeth. Kravik had studied predator behavior across dozens of worlds, but he had never seen anything like this. The honey badger was outweighed and outnumbered, wounded from its fight with the venomous crawler, yet it continued to position itself between the boy and any threat. Its courage was not the mindless aggression of a cornered animal. This was calculated protection, the kind of behavior he associated with parents defending offspring. The first prowler recovered from the badger's attack and circled back for another attempt. Now the small defender faced enemies on 2 sides while protecting a human child who could barely hold a stick upright. The situation was hopeless, yet the honey badger refused to retreat. It moved in quick dashes between the prowlers, drawing their attention away from the boy. Blood matted the badger's fur from multiple wounds, but its determination never wavered. When the first prowler made another rush, the badger met it head-on, accepting terrible damage to prevent the predator from reaching the child. When the second prowler tried to circle around, the badger limped after it, forcing the larger animal to focus on the immediate threat rather than the easier target. The boy huddled under the fallen log, clutching his stick and watching his defender fight for both their lives. Kravik could see tears streaming down the child's face, but the boy made no sound that might distract the honey badger from its desperate battle. Even in his terror, the human child seemed to understand that his protector needed complete focus to have any chance of success. The sounds of the approaching search party grew louder, but they were still several minutes away. The honey badger was weakening from blood loss and exhaustion. One of the prowlers had learned to stay just out of reach, forcing the smaller animal to chase it while the second predator looked for an opening. It was a tactic that would succeed within moments. Kravik found his hand moving toward his weapon before he consciously realized what he was doing. His mission was observation, not intervention. The Galactic Council needed data on human survival capabilities, and rescuing this child would contaminate that data. But watching the honey badger's futile courage was becoming unbearable. The second prowler saw its opportunity and charged toward the fallen log. The honey badger turned to intercept, but it was too far away and too weak to reach the boy in time. The child raised his stick with both hands, knowing it was useless but refusing to surrender without trying to defend himself. That was when Kravik truly understood what he was witnessing. This was not about survival data or threat assessment. This was about the kind of bond that transcended species barriers, the willingness to die for someone who could offer nothing in return. The honey badger was not protecting the boy because of training or instinct. It was protecting him because that protection mattered more than its own life. The prowler's leap carried it over the honey badger and toward the boy. But at the last second, the small defender found one final burst of speed. It intercepted the larger predator in midair, taking the full impact of claws and teeth meant for the child. Both animals crashed to the ground in a snarling heap, the honey badger's jaws locked on the prowler's throat. The first prowler moved in for the killing blow, while its partner was tangled with the badger. But before it could strike, human voices erupted from the darkness beyond the trees. Bright lights cut through the forest as the search party finally found the right trail. The remaining prowler hesitated, caught between its hunting instincts and its fear of humans in groups. Adult humans burst into the clearing, carrying electric torches and making enough noise to frighten away most predators. The first prowler decided that discretion was the better part of valor and melted back into the forest shadows. The second prowler tried to follow, but the honey badger's grip on its throat had not loosened even in death. The boy crawled out from under the fallen log and ran toward the approaching humans, sobbing with relief and exhaustion. But instead of running past the honey badger, he stopped beside the small animal and knelt down. The badger was still breathing, barely, its body broken from the fight but its eyes still alert. Kravik adjusted his scope to get a better view of what happened next. The adult humans surrounded the boy, checking him for injuries and offering comfort. But the child kept pointing to the honey badger, trying to explain what had happened through his tears. The adults quickly understood and turned their attention to the wounded animal. One of the humans, a woman with gray hair and gentle hands, carefully examined the honey badger while others held lights. She spoke in soft tones, not just to calm the injured animal, but with genuine affection. She called the badger by name, Scrapper, and her voice carried the same concern she might show for an injured family member. The woman produced a medical kit from her pack and began treating the badger's wounds with practiced skill. Other humans worked to free the animal from the dead prowler's grip, moving carefully to avoid causing further injury. Throughout the process, they spoke to Scrapper with the kind of reassuring voices used for frightened children. Kravik watched this scene with growing confusion. These humans were treating a wild animal with the same care they would give their own species. The medical supplies they used on the honey badger were clearly intended for human injuries, yet they applied them without hesitation to save their unexpected ally. The time and effort spent on Scrapper could have been used to get the boy back to safety, but no one suggested abandoning the wounded animal. As they prepared to carry both the boy and the honey badger back to the settlement, Kravik realized he was witnessing something that challenged everything his species believed about intelligent behavior. Rational beings allocated resources based on survival value and genetic relationship. They did not risk group safety for unrelated animals, especially animals that offered no obvious benefit. Yet these humans were doing exactly that. They constructed a makeshift stretcher for Scrapper and assigned 2 adults to carry it, reducing their travel speed and defensive capability. They used precious medical supplies on an animal that most species would consider expendable. Most puzzling of all, they did these things without debate or discussion, as if caring for the honey badger was the most natural response in the galaxy. The search party began its journey back to New Haven, moving slowly to avoid jarring the injured badger. The boy walked beside Scrapper's stretcher, his small hand resting gently on the animal's fur. The honey badger's eyes remained fixed on the child, as if making sure its protectee was truly safe. Kravik packed his observation equipment and prepared to follow the group back to the settlement. His understanding of human behavior had been fundamentally altered by what he had witnessed. These were not the aggressive, dangerous beings that some council members feared. Nor were they the primitive, instinct-driven creatures that others dismissed. They were something else entirely, something that formed bonds of loyalty and sacrifice that defied rational explanation. The honey badger had been willing to die for the human child, and the humans were willing to risk everything to save the honey badger. It was a relationship that existed outside the normal calculations of survival and genetic advantage. As the lights of the search party disappeared into the forest ahead of him, Kravik realized that his mission had become far more complex than anyone had anticipated. He was no longer simply studying a potential threat to galactic stability. He was trying to understand a species whose behavior challenged the fundamental assumptions about intelligence and civilization that his people had held for centuries. Dawn broke over New Haven with the kind of golden light that made the settlement look peaceful and welcoming. Kravik had positioned himself on a hill overlooking the community, watching as humans began their daily routines. But today was different. Today he was looking for answers to questions that had kept him awake through the night. The boy named Ben had been reunited with his family hours earlier. Kravik had watched through his scope as parents embraced their son with the kind of fierce joy that seemed to consume their entire beings. The emotion was so intense that even from a distance Kravik could feel the power of their relief and gratitude. But what fascinated him more was how the humans had treated Scrapper. The honey badger had been taken to what appeared to be a medical facility, where several humans worked through the night to treat its injuries. They used advanced equipment and techniques that suggested the animal's care was just as important as any human patient would be. Through his scope, Kravik could see activity around the medical building. Humans moved in and out, checking on the wounded animal and bringing supplies. The boy Ben was there too, sitting beside a window where he could see inside. His parents had not forced him to leave or told him to forget about the animal that had saved his life. Around midday, Kravik witnessed something that would change his understanding of human nature forever. An older woman emerged from the medical facility carrying Scrapper in her arms. The honey badger was wrapped in soft blankets and appeared to be recovering well from its injuries. A crowd of humans had gathered outside, not out of curiosity but out of genuine concern for the animal's welfare. Ben ran to the woman and gently touched Scrapper's head. The honey badger's eyes opened and focused on the boy, and Kravik could see the recognition pass between them. This was not the first time they had interacted. This was a reunion between old friends. The woman began speaking to the crowd, and even from his distant position, Kravik could hear the warmth in her voice. She was telling the story of how Scrapper came to be part of their community, and Kravik listened with growing amazement to what his translation device revealed. Scrapper had been found as an orphaned kit nearly 2 years earlier, injured and alone after his mother was killed by predators. The humans could have left him to die or kept him as a captive specimen. Instead, they had nursed him back to health and given him the choice of what to do with his life. They had not caged Scrapper or tried to tame him. They had simply cared for him until he was strong enough to survive on his own, then allowed him to make his own decisions about where to live and how to spend his time. The honey badger had chosen to remain near the human settlement, not because he was trapped or dependent, but because he wanted to be there. The humans had not tried to make Scrapper into a pet or a tool. They had accepted him as an independent being with his own desires and personality. In return, the honey badger had appointed himself as an unofficial guardian of the community, particularly protective of the children who played near the forest edge. Kravik watched as the story unfolded, each detail challenging his preconceptions about intelligent behavior. Rational beings did not invest resources in unrelated species without expecting some return. They did not form emotional bonds with animals that offered no genetic advantage, yet these humans had done exactly that, and the result was a loyalty that had nearly cost Scrapper his life to protect one of their young. The medical treatment continued for several more days, and Kravik observed every moment he could. The humans took turns sitting with Scrapper, talking to him in gentle voices and offering food and water. Children brought drawings they had made of the honey badger, decorating the walls of his recovery room with colorful pictures that showed him as a hero. Ben visited every day, sometimes reading books aloud to Scrapper or simply sitting quietly beside his bed. The bond between them was obvious to anyone watching. This was not ownership or training. This was friendship in its purest form, based on mutual affection and respect rather than any practical consideration. Kravik also observed how other animals responded to the human settlement. Birds nested in the structures without fear. Small mammals wandered through the community during the day, taking food that humans deliberately left for them. Larger herbivores grazed in the open spaces around the buildings, knowing they were safe from predators in the humans' presence. This was not the result of domestication or control. The animals remained wild and free, but they had learned to trust these particular humans. The settlement existed in harmony with the local ecosystem in a way that Kravik had never seen before. Most intelligent species either dominated their environment or were dominated by it. These humans had found a third option: partnership. The revelation that changed everything came on the fourth day after the rescue. Kravik was watching through his scope when a group of children found an injured bird near the forest edge. Instead of ignoring it or treating it as a curiosity, they carefully picked up the bird and brought it to the same medical facility where Scrapper was recovering. The same woman who had cared for the honey badger examined the bird with equal attention and skill. She treated its broken wing with the same advanced techniques and equipment she had used on Scrapper. When Ben arrived to check on his protector, he immediately asked about the bird and offered to help with its care. Kravik realized he was watching a pattern of behavior that went far beyond simple kindness. These humans genuinely cared about the welfare of other species, not as a means to an end, but as an end in itself. They invested time, resources, and emotional energy in creatures that could offer them nothing in return, except the satisfaction of knowing they had helped. This was the key to understanding human success in environments where other species failed. They did not conquer their surroundings or submit to them. They formed relationships with them. The loyalty they inspired in creatures like Scrapper was not an accident or a curiosity. It was the natural result of genuine care and respect offered freely to any being that needed help. When Scrapper was finally well enough to leave the medical facility, the humans did not keep him confined or try to control his movements. They simply opened the doors and allowed him to choose his own path. The honey badger could have returned to the deep forest or traveled to any part of the continent. Instead, he chose to remain with the humans who had saved his life twice, once as a kid and once as an adult. Kravik watched as Scrapper resumed his unofficial role as community guardian, patrolling the edges of the settlement and keeping watch over the children who played in the open spaces. Ben and the honey badger were inseparable, the boy's trust in his protector absolute, and the animal's devotion to the child unshakable. This was not the behavior of a species that posed a threat to galactic stability. This was the behavior of a species that could transform any environment into something better than it had been before. The humans did not destroy or dominate. They healed and protected and nurtured. They created bonds of loyalty and affection that transcended the normal boundaries between species. Kravik began composing his report to the Galactic Council, but he found himself struggling to put his observations into words that would make sense to his superiors. How could he explain that humans were dangerous not because they were aggressive, but because they were kind? How could he make them understand that the threat humans posed was not to other species, but to the assumptions that had guided galactic civilization for millennia? 2 weeks after the rescue, Kravik found himself spending more time observing individual humans than conducting the systematic threat assessment he had been sent to complete. Each day brought new examples of behavior that defied everything he thought he knew about intelligent species. Yesterday, he had watched a human woman spend 3 hours trying to help a lost deer find its way back to its herd. The animal was old and confused, wandering in circles near the settlement boundary. Any rational being would have ignored the deer or driven it away to prevent it from attracting predators. Instead, the woman had patiently guided the animal through the forest until it was reunited with its family group. The day before that, he had observed human children sharing their lunch with a family of small primates that lived in the trees around the settlement. The children had less food as a result, but they seemed genuinely happy to see the primates eating well. When one of the young primates fell from a tree and injured its leg, the children immediately brought it to the medical facility for treatment. These were not isolated incidents. Kravik was beginning to understand that such behavior was normal for these humans. They allocated significant resources to caring for other species, not because they expected any return on their investment, but because they genuinely believed it was the right thing to do. His database now contained hundreds of examples of human kindness toward other life forms. An engineer who had modified the settlement's water system to create drinking pools for local wildlife. A teacher who had incorporated care for injured animals into the children's daily lessons. A construction crew that had stopped work for 2 days to relocate a nest of rare birds rather than disturb their breeding cycle. Most puzzling of all was the human veterinarian named Dr. Sarah. Kravik had been watching her work for over a week, and her dedication to animal welfare seemed to consume every moment of her life. She treated creatures ranging from insects to large mammals with equal care and attention. Her medical skills were remarkable, but what impressed Kravik most was her emotional investment in every patient. Last night, Dr. Sarah had worked through the darkness to save a young wolf that had been caught in an old trap left by previous inhabitants of the planet. The wolf was a natural predator that posed a potential threat to human children. Yet she had used the most advanced techniques available to repair its damaged leg. When the wolf recovered, she would release it back into the wild where it might one day threaten the very people who had saved its life. Kravik tried to understand the logic behind such behavior, but it made no sense according to any rational framework he knew. Species survived by promoting their own interests and the interests of their genetic relatives. They might form temporary alliances with other species for mutual benefit, but they did not sacrifice their own resources for unrelated creatures that offered nothing in return. Yet these humans did exactly that, and they did it consistently and without apparent internal conflict. They seemed to derive genuine satisfaction from helping other species, as if the act of caring was its own reward. The time and energy they spent on animal welfare could have been used to improve their own living conditions or advance their own goals, but they chose to help others instead. Kravik's reports to the Galactic Council were becoming increasingly difficult to write. His superiors wanted data on human aggression and expansion patterns, evidence that would support their classification as a potential threat to galactic stability. Instead, he was documenting a species that seemed more interested in healing than harming, more focused on building relationships than conquering territory. The Council's response to his latest report had been skeptical. They reminded him that humans were spreading rapidly across the galaxy, establishing colonies on worlds that other species had claimed or rejected. They pointed to human technological advancement and their history of warfare as evidence of their dangerous nature. They wanted him to look deeper, to find the aggression and ambition that must be hidden beneath the surface kindness. But the more Kravik observed, the more convinced he became that what he was seeing represented the true nature of humanity. The kindness was not a facade or a strategy. It was the fundamental characteristic that drove all other human behavior. They expanded across the galaxy not to conquer or dominate, but to find new places where they could build the kind of harmonious communities he was witnessing on Verdant. His internal conflict grew stronger each day. His duty was to provide accurate intelligence to the Galactic Council, but his observations were leading him to conclusions that his superiors would not want to hear. If he reported that humans posed no threat to galactic stability, the Council might decide that his judgment had been compromised. If he fabricated evidence of human aggression, he would be betraying everything his species claimed to value about truth and accuracy. The situation became more complicated when he received new orders from the Council. They were no longer satisfied with passive observation. They wanted him to conduct specimen collection, essentially hunting humans for transport to council facilities where they could be studied under controlled conditions. The orders were clear and specific. He was to capture several humans, including at least one child, for detailed analysis of their behavior and capabilities. Kravik stared at the orders for a long time, feeling something he had never experienced before in his long career as a hunter. The thought of capturing Ben, the boy who had been saved by Scrapper's courage, made him physically ill. The idea of separating Dr. Sarah from her animal patients seemed like a crime against the natural order of the universe. He had been trained from birth to follow orders without question, to trust that his superiors understood the larger picture even when individual missions seemed harsh or unnecessary. But this time was different. This time he had seen what would be destroyed if he followed his orders. The humans he had been watching were not specimens to be collected and studied. They were individuals with their own hopes and dreams and relationships. They were part of a community that had found a way to live in harmony with dozens of other species. They were builders and healers and teachers who made their world better simply by being in it. Kravik found himself remembering the night when Scrapper had nearly died protecting Ben. The honey badger's courage had been absolute. His willingness to sacrifice everything for someone he cared about complete and unquestioning. Now Kravik was facing his own test of courage, his own choice between duty and conscience. He could follow his orders and capture the humans his superiors wanted. It would be easy enough. They trusted their environment completely and had no defenses against a trained hunter. He could complete his mission and return to his home world with the praise of the council and advancement in his career. Or he could refuse, knowing that such refusal would probably end his career and possibly his life. The council did not tolerate disobedience, especially from hunters who had been trusted with sensitive missions. If he defied his orders, he would become a rogue agent, hunted by his own people and unwelcome in civilized space. But as he watched Ben playing with Scrapper in the settlement below, laughing as the honey badger performed mock attacks on a toy that the boy held just out of reach, Kravik realized that some choices were more important than career or safety. Some bonds were worth protecting regardless of the personal cost. The image of Scrapper's desperate courage had changed something fundamental in Kravik's understanding of what it meant to be truly alive. Loyalty and love and sacrifice were not weaknesses to be exploited or curiosities to be studied. They were the forces that gave meaning to existence, the bonds that connected all living things in ways that transcended species and intelligence and rational calculation. Kravik began composing a message to the Galactic Council, knowing it would be the last official communication he would ever send to his superiors. Kravik's fingers hesitated over the communication device as he prepared to send what he knew would be his final report to the Galactic Council. The message was unlike anything he had ever written, filled with observations and conclusions that would shock his superiors, and probably result in his classification as a rogue agent. The report described a species that posed no threat to galactic stability because their fundamental nature was to build rather than destroy, to heal rather than harm, to protect rather than conquer. It recommended that humans be granted protected status and allowed to continue their expansion without interference. Most importantly, it advised against any attempt to capture or study humans, warning that such actions would destroy the very qualities that made them unique. Before sending the message, Kravik took one last look at the settlement through his scope. Ben was playing in the common area with several other children while Scrapper watched from nearby, the honey badger's alert eyes scanning for any sign of danger. Dr. Sarah was tending to a wounded bird in her makeshift clinic, while a group of local mammals waited patiently for their turn to receive care. This was the scene that had changed everything for Kravik. This was proof that intelligence could take forms that the Galactic Council had never imagined. The humans below were not just surviving in harmony with their environment, they were improving it, creating something better and more beautiful than what had existed before their arrival. Kravik transmitted his report and then began the process of destroying his weapons and surveillance equipment. If the council rejected his recommendations and sent other hunters to capture humans, he would not make their task easier by leaving advanced technology behind. Each device he dismantled felt like a small victory against the cold logic that had governed his life for so many years. The response from the council came within hours, exactly as he had expected. His report was rejected as the product of compromised judgment. New hunters were being dispatched to complete his mission and to apprehend him for failure to follow orders. His career was over, his citizenship revoked, and his life forfeit if he resisted capture. Kravik read the message twice, then deleted it and destroyed his communication equipment. He was no longer an agent of the Galactic Council. He was no longer bound by their laws or their definition of acceptable behavior. For the first time in his adult life, he was free to make choices based on his own understanding of right and wrong. The decision of what to do next was surprisingly easy. The humans had no idea that they were about to be hunted by creatures far more dangerous than any predator their world had produced. They trusted their environment completely, including the alien visitor they had no reason to suspect was watching them. That trust made them vulnerable, but it also made them worth protecting. Kravik gathered his remaining equipment and began the journey down from his observation post toward the settlement. He had no plan beyond warning the humans of the danger they faced and offering whatever help he could provide. It was not much, but it was all he had to give. The walk through the forest gave him time to think about what he was doing and why. According to everything he had been taught, he was betraying his own species for the sake of aliens who had never done anything for him. He was throwing away a successful career and a comfortable life for the sake of strangers, who would probably never fully understand what he had sacrificed for them. But as he remembered Scrapper's desperate courage in protecting Ben, Kravik realized that some actions transcended rational calculation. The honey badger had not weighed the costs and benefits of fighting the prowlers. It had simply done what needed to be done because protecting someone you cared about was more important than protecting yourself. The edge of the settlement appeared ahead, marked by the gardens where humans grew food alongside native plants in patterns that supported local wildlife. Several children were playing near the tree line, including Ben, who was teaching a group of younger children how to identify different animal tracks in the soft earth. Kravik activated his translation device and stepped out of the forest, knowing that his appearance would cause alarm, but hoping that his obvious lack of weapons would prevent panic. The children stopped playing and stared at him with wide eyes, but none of them ran away. Their curiosity seemed stronger than their fear, another example of the trust that made humans both vulnerable and remarkable. Ben was the first to speak, his young voice clear and unafraid. He asked if Kravik was lost and if he needed help. The same offer of assistance that his people extended to any creature in distress. The simple kindness of the question nearly overwhelmed the former hunter, who had expected suspicion or hostility. Other humans began to arrive, drawn by the children's voices and the sight of an unknown alien. They formed a loose circle around Kravik, but their body language suggested curiosity rather than aggression. Dr. Sarah was among them, her medical bag in hand in case the visitor was injured or ill. Kravik began to speak, his words translated into human language by his device. He explained who he was and why he had come to their world, describing his mission and his decision to abandon it. He warned them about the hunters who would soon arrive to capture them for study, and offered to help them prepare defenses against creatures who possessed technology and skills far beyond anything they had encountered. The humans listened without interruption, their expressions growing more serious as they understood the magnitude of the threat they faced. But when Kravik finished speaking, their response surprised him once again. Instead of panic or anger, they offered him food and shelter and asked what they could do to help him in return. They were not naive about the danger they faced, but they were not willing to abandon their principles because of it. They would defend themselves and their community, but they would not become something they were not in order to survive. They would remain human, with all the kindness and trust and generosity that made them unique in the galaxy. Over the following days, Kravik worked with the humans to prepare for the arrival of the council hunters. His knowledge of their tactics and technology helped the community develop strategies that might give them a chance against overwhelming odds. But more importantly, his presence served as proof that not all aliens were enemies, that friendship and loyalty could exist between species that had never met before. Ben became his constant companion, the boy's acceptance of the former hunter complete and unquestioning. Scrapper was more cautious but eventually warmed to Kravik after observing his interactions with the children. The honey badger's approval felt like an honor, that the alien had done nothing to deserve but everything to appreciate. When the council hunters finally arrived, they found a community that was ready for them. But more than that, They found a former colleague who had chosen to stand with the humans rather than against them. Kravik's decision to abandon his mission and protect the people he had been sent to capture sent shockwaves through the Galactic Council. That would be felt for generations. The final confrontation was brief but decisive. The hunters were forced to retreat when they realized that capturing humans would require them to fight one of their own people, and that the cost of victory would be higher than the Council was willing to pay. They left planet Verdant with empty hands and a message for their superiors that some things were too valuable to be reduced to specimens in a laboratory. Kravik watched the hunter's ship disappear into the sky from his new home in the settlement that had welcomed him without reservation. Ben sat beside him with Scrapper curled up between them. The three unlikely friends united by bonds that transcended species and logic and the cold calculations of galactic politics. The former hunter had found something on this world that he had never known existed, a place where loyalty and love were not weaknesses to be exploited but strengths to be celebrated. He had learned that true courage was not the ability to hunt and kill, but the willingness to protect and nurture those who needed help. As the sun set over New Haven, Kravik realized that he had completed the most important mission of his life. He had not captured specimens for the Galactic Council, but he had discovered something far more valuable, proof that the universe was vast enough to contain wonders that no amount of study could diminish and bonds that no amount of force could break.